He left her as just a student. 7 years later, she was the judge in his divorce case. You're just a student, Naomi. A footnote in my life. I need a partner, not a charity project. Ronald's voice was ice, his gaze dismissing her like trash. Eleanor has connections, wealth. You have student loans and a cheap suit. We are not in the same league. He walked away, leaving her shattered. 7 years later, the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B swung open. Ronald Hayes, now facing a brutal divorce, looked up at the bench. The gavel slammed. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. For the Honorable Judge Naomi Pierce. The rain was coming down in sheets over Washington, D.C., blurring the streetlights into smeared streaks of amber and gold. Inside the dimly lit mahogany-paneled dining room of the Capitol Grill on Pennsylvania Avenue, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of dry-aged steaks and expensive perfume. For 24-year-old Naomi Pierce, a second-year law student at Georgetown University Law Center, this dinner was supposed to be a celebration. She had just secured a prestigious summer clerkship, a life-changing milestone for a girl who had grown up in a trailer park in West Virginia. Sitting across from her was Ronald Hayes. At 35, Ronald was a visiting adjunct professor of corporate law at Georgetown and a senior associate at a top-tier K Street lobbying firm. He was devastatingly handsome, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit, a vintage Rolex Daytona gleaming carelessly on his left wrist. For 8 months, they had kept their relationship a secret, hiding in the shadows of campus libraries and his luxury DuPont Circle penthouse. Naomi had loved him with the desperate, blinding intensity of a first real love. She thought they were building a future. She thought tonight was the night he would finally ask her to move in with him. Ronald swirled his glass of 2010 Chateau Margaux, staring over Naomi's head rather than at her. When he finally spoke, his tone was casual, as if he were discussing a minor change in a legal contract rather than annihilating her heart. "I'm getting married, Naomi," he said. The words dropped into the space between them like lead weights. Naomi's breath hitched. A nervous, confused smile flickered on her lips. "What? Ronald? What are you talking about?" "Her name is Eleanor Vance," Ronald continued smoothly, taking a slow sip of the deep red wine. "Her father is the senior partner at Vance, Sterling and Hall. We've been seeing each other for a few months. The engagement is going to be announced in the Washington Post this weekend." The world tilted on its axis. The low hum of the restaurant faded into a high-pitched ringing in Naomi's ears. "A few months? We've been together for 8. You've been cheating on me." Her voice cracked, betraying the sudden, violent tremor in her hands. She gripped the edge of the white linen tablecloth to steady herself. Ronald sighed, an exaggerated sound of profound exhaustion, as if her heartbreak was a terrible inconvenience to his evening. "Naomi, let's not be dramatic. What we had was fun. It was a distraction, but you have to be realistic. Look at you." His eyes swept over her carefully thrifted blazer and her pale, shocked face. "You're a student. You're drowning in debt. You don't know anyone in this town. You don't have the pedigree." "I love you," she whispered, the tears finally breaking free, hot and humiliating against her cheeks. "Love doesn't build empires, Naomi," Ronald sneered, the charming mask fully slipping away to reveal the cold, calculating narcissist beneath. "You're just a student, a footnote in my life. I need a partner, not a charity project. Eleanor is a strategic alliance. You're a liability." He didn't wait for her to respond. He signaled the waiter, signed the exorbitant bill without glancing at it, and stood up. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it onto her empty bread plate. "For your cab. Have a nice life, Naomi. Don't contact me again. It would look pathetic." He walked out, leaving her sitting alone in the middle of the crowded, elegant restaurant. The $100 bill sat there like a brand, a physical manifestation of her worthlessness in his eyes. Naomi didn't take a cab. She walked the 2 miles back to her cramped apartment in the freezing, pouring rain, her tears washing away the girl she used to be. By the time she unlocked her door, she was shivering, soaked to the bone, and fundamentally changed. The soft, hopeful student had died on the pavement of Pennsylvania Avenue. In her place, something made of cold, hard steel had begun to forge. The morning after the breakup, Naomi didn't cry. She packed every gift Ronald had ever given her, every note, every remnant of his existence, and threw them into the campus dumpster. Then she opened her constitutional law textbook and began to read. Grief is a powerful engine if harnessed correctly, and Naomi Pierce weaponized her devastation. She became a ghost at Georgetown Law. She stopped going to parties, stopped dating, and stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. Her classmates whispered about the sudden, terrifying intensity that radiated from her. She lived in the law library, her mind absorbing statutes, precedents, and loopholes with the hunger of a starving wolf. When she saw Ronald on campus, walking with his new, wealthy fiancé, she didn't look down. She stared through them, her face an unreadable mask of stone. She graduated summa cum laude, ranking number 1 in her entire class. Ronald, meanwhile, had married Eleanor Vance in a lavish ceremony featured in high society magazines, securing his partnership at his father-in-law's firm. But Naomi didn't care anymore. She was on a trajectory he couldn't even fathom. She bypassed the corporate law firms that Ronald worshipped. Instead, she took a grueling clerkship with a ruthless federal appellate judge, a man who taught her that justice wasn't blind, it was simply waiting for someone with the courage to swing the sword. From there, she joined the district attorney's office. She became an absolute terror in the courtroom, a prosecutor with a photographic memory and a complete lack of mercy for arrogant men in expensive suits. She prosecuted white-collar criminals, corrupt politicians, and billionaire fraudsters. She built a reputation as brilliant, unyielding, and completely immune to manipulation. The years bled into one another. 7 years of relentless, agonizing, glorious work. Her thrift store blazers were replaced by tailored St. John knits. The trembling, insecure girl was gone, replaced by a 31-year-old woman with a stare that could freeze boiling water. Her meteoric rise did not go unnoticed. When a vacancy opened up in the State Family Court Division, a notoriously complex and emotionally draining bench, the governor, impressed by her flawless record and ironclad ethics, appointed her. At 31, she was one of the youngest judges in the state's history. Judge Naomi Pierce commanded her courtroom with absolute authority. She had seen every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to hide assets and dodge responsibility. She was known as the Ice Queen of the Bench, a moniker she wore as a badge of honor. She had spent 7 years building an impenetrable fortress around herself, ensuring that no one would ever have the power to reduce her to a weeping, discarded girl with $100 bill on a plate. She hadn't thought about Ronald Hayes in years. He was exactly what he had claimed she would be. A footnote. But fate and the legal system have a wicked sense of humor. Karma, as it turns out, does not forget. It simply waits for the perfect jurisdiction. It was a brisk Tuesday morning. Judge Naomi Pierce sat in her chambers, sipping black coffee and reviewing the day's docket. Her chambers were sparse, clinical, and impeccably organized. She ran a finger down the printed list of cases for the morning session. Case number 4, 092-B. Vance Hayes versus Hayes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Naomi's finger paused. The name Hayes was common enough. But Vance Hayes? The hyphenation triggered a dormant memory. She opened the case file. Respondent: Ronald Arthur Hayes. Petitioner: Eleanor Vance Hayes. A slow, cool breath escaped her lips. It was him. The file was thick, practically bursting with emergency motions, discovery disputes, and restraining orders regarding financial assets. It was a high-conflict divorce. According to the preliminary filings, Ronald had allegedly been caught in a string of infidelities and was now accused of siphoning millions of dollars from Eleanor's family trust into offshore shell corporations. Naomi felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't even anger. It was the sharp, thrilling, electric hum of absolute clarity. She was the presiding judge on the financial ruin of the man who had destroyed her. She stood up, walked over to the full-length mirror in her chambers, and carefully shrugged into her heavy black judicial robe. She zipped it up, smoothing the fabric over her shoulders. The robe was a symbol of her power, her neutrality, her absolute domain. She picked up her gavel and walked out the door. Inside courtroom 3B, the air was thick with tension. Ronald Hayes sat at the respondent's table. 7 years had not been kind to him. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy was gone. His hair was thinning and peppered with grey. His posture was slumped, and the bespoke Brioni suit hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he were shrinking. Beside him sat a mid-level, visibly sweating attorney, who looked completely out of his depth. At the petitioner's table sat Eleanor, looking impeccably wealthy and furiously vindictive. But it was the man sitting next to Eleanor who commanded the room's attention. Robert Hall. Robert Hall was not just Eleanor's attorney. He was a legend in family law. He was a silver-haired shark, known for financially eviscerating his opponents. He was a master tactician, and he was out for blood. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, shattering the low murmurs in the gallery. "The State Family Court is now in session, the Honourable Judge Naomi Pierce presiding." Ronald, who had been staring at his legal pad with a look of desperate exhaustion, slowly lifted his head. He watched as the judge walked up the steps to the bench. She sat down, adjusted her microphone, and looked out over the courtroom. For a split second, Ronald's eyes met hers. Naomi watched the colour completely drain from his face. His jaw slackened. His eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. The breath visibly left his lungs. He blinked, rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. But it was no hallucination. The charity project, the footnote, the girl he had discarded like trash in the rain, was currently sitting elevated above him, holding the absolute legal authority to dismantle his entire life. Naomi's face remained a mask of flawless, terrifying indifference. "Good morning, counsel," her voice rang out, clear, cold, and echoing off the wood-panelled walls. "Call the first case. Case number 4092-B, Vance Hayes versus Hayes," the clerk announced. Naomi opened the file. "Before we begin, counsel, there is a matter of record that must be addressed." The courtroom went dead silent. Robert Hall stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honour." Naomi kept her eyes fixed on the back wall, addressing the room rather than the man trembling at the respondent's table. "It is my duty to disclose a prior acquaintance with the respondent, Mr. Ronald Hayes. Approximately 7 years ago, prior to my legal career, Mr. Hayes and I were briefly acquainted at Georgetown University. Given the nature of this court, I am offering both parties the opportunity to request my recusal from this case to avoid any appearance of impropriety." Ronald's lawyer, a nervous man named Miller, leaned over and aggressively whispered into Ronald's ear. "We need to file the motion to recuse right now. If you have a history with the judge, she's going to crucify you." But Ronald Hayes, despite his current desperate situation, was still fundamentally the same arrogant narcissist he had been 7 years ago. His mind raced. He was backed into a corner. Robert Hall had him dead to rights on the infidelity, and Eleanor's family was trying to freeze his bank accounts. He was facing total ruin. But Naomi had loved him. She had wept for him. In his twisted, ego-driven logic, he genuinely believed that no woman who had ever loved him could truly hate him. He thought he saw an opening, a lifeline. He believed he could manipulate her one last time. He thought she might actually go easy on him out of some lingering, pathetic sentimentality. "No," Ronald hissed back to his lawyer, gripping his forearm. "Don't you dare ask for a recusal." "Are you insane, Ronald?" Miller whispered frantically. "Do exactly as I say," Ronald commanded, a desperate glint in his eye. He looked up at Naomi, offering a pathetic, pleading, intensely personal look. It was a look that said, "Please, save me." Miller stood up, looking nauseous. "Your Honor, the respondent waives the right to request a recusal. We are confident in the court's impartiality." Naomi's expression did not change by a single millimeter. She turned her gaze to Robert Hall. "Mr. Hall, does the petitioner have any objections?" Robert Hall, the legendary shark, smiled a slow, predatory smile. He had done his homework. He knew exactly who Naomi Pierce was. He knew about her reputation as the Ice Queen. He knew she had an ironclad record of destroying men who tried to hide assets. He didn't know the specifics of her past with Ronald, but he knew one thing for certain. Naomi Pierce was a judge who followed the letter of the law to its most brutal, logical conclusion. And the law was entirely on his side. "The petitioner has no objections, Your Honor," Robert Hall said smoothly. "We waive any conflict. Let the trial commence." "Very well," Naomi said, picking up her pen. "The waivers are noted for the record. Mr. Hall, you may proceed with your opening arguments regarding the temporary financial injunction." Ronald let out a quiet sigh of relief, leaning back in his chair. He truly believed he had just played a masterstroke. He had no idea he had just locked the door to his own execution chamber. Robert Hall walked to the podium. "Your Honor, we are here today to discuss the respondent's blatant, systematic theft of marital assets. For the past 3 years, Mr. Hayes has been funneling money out of joint accounts, money that belongs to his wife's family trust, and hiding it in a complex web of offshore entities. We have the financial forensics. We are asking the court to freeze all of Mr. Hayes' personal accounts, revoke his passport, and compel the immediate return of $4.2 million. Ronald scoffed loudly. "That's a lie." Bang! Naomi's gavel struck the sounding block with the force of a gunshot. Ronald jumped in his seat. "Mr. Hayes." Naomi's voice was dangerously low, slicing through the air like a straight razor. "If you speak out of turn in my courtroom again, I will hold you in contempt, and you will spend the night in a holding cell. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" Ronald swallowed hard, his face flushing dark red. The illusion that she was going to be a soft, sympathetic savior shattered in an instant. "Yes, Your Honor," he mumbled. Naomi turned back to Robert Hall. "Proceed, Mr. Hall. I want to see the forensics." The trial lasted for 3 grueling days. It was a masterclass in legal dismantling. Robert Hall methodically presented bank statements, wire transfers, and encrypted emails. He painted a picture of Ronald Hayes not just as a cheating husband, but as a sophisticated financial predator who had used his legal knowledge to defraud his own wife. Through it all, Judge Naomi Pierce watched with the cold, unblinking focus of a hawk. She ruled on objections with lightning speed, strictly adhering to the rules of evidence. She gave Ronald's inept lawyer no quarter, striking down his flimsy defenses with brutal precision. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the climax arrived. Robert Hall called Ronald Hayes to the stand. Ronald walked to the witness box, raising his right hand. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth," he stated, trying to muster the old authoritative charm he used to use on his law students. It fell flat in the sterile air of the courtroom. Robert Hall approached the witness stand. "Mr. Hayes, I direct your attention to Petitioner's Exhibit 42. It is a wire transfer for $800,000 to an entity called Apex Holdings LLC, located in the Cayman Islands. Do you own or have any beneficial interest in Apex Holdings?" Ronald gripped the edges of the witness stand. He knew if he admitted to the offshore account, he would be guilty of massive financial fraud and ordered to pay it all back, leaving him penniless. He looked at Naomi. He thought of his status, his reputation, his ego. He decided to double down on his arrogance. "No," Ronald lied, his voice steady. "I have no knowledge of that company. My wife's family manages all the investments. I assume it was one of Eleanor's father's tax shelters." Robert Hall smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just caught a very large fish. "You have no knowledge of it. Under oath, you state you are not the beneficial owner of the account at Cayman National Bank." "That is correct," Ronald said. Robert Hall turned to the bench. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce a rebuttal exhibit. Late last night, we received a subpoenaed document directly from Cayman National Bank, piercing the corporate veil of Apex Holdings. It is the original incorporation document." Robert handed the document to the bailiff, who handed it to Naomi and then gave a copy to Ronald's lawyer. Naomi reviewed the document. Her eyes scanned the page, locking onto the signature at the bottom. She looked up at Ronald. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "This document appears to be a notarized incorporation charter. The sole signatory, and 100% beneficial owner, is listed as Ronald Arthur Hayes. Is this your signature?" Ronald stared at the copy his lawyer had just shoved in front of him. The blood drained from his head so fast he felt dizzy. He was caught. Not just in a lie, but in felony perjury in open court. He stammered, looking frantically for a way out. I don't recall." "That could be a forgery." Naomi leaned forward. The air in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Hayes, you are a lawyer. You understand the penalties for perjury in this state. I will ask you one more time. Is that your signature?" Ronald looked up at the bench. He didn't see the judge anymore. For a fleeting second, he saw the 24-year-old girl in the cheap blazer standing in the rain outside the Capitol Grill. He realized, with a sickening, crushing weight, the magnitude of what he had done 7 years ago, and the magnitude of his mistake today. He had waived the recusal. He had willingly handed the blade to the woman he had destroyed. "Yes," Ronald whispered, his voice cracking. "It's my signature." "No further questions, Your Honor," Robert Hall said, returning to his seat victorious. "The witness is excused," Naomi commanded. Ronald stumbled back to his table, a broken, defeated shell of a man. He put his head in his hands. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread through the legal community about the high-profile divorce and the impending judgment. Naomi entered the room, her presence commanding absolute silence. She sat down, opened her final ruling, and looked out over the room. "This court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and financial forensics presented in the matter of Vance Hayes versus Hayes," Naomi began, her voice ringing with the finality of a death knell. "The purpose of this court is to ensure an equitable distribution of marital assets. However, equity relies on the fundamental assumption of honesty and good faith by both parties. The respondent, Mr. Hayes, has demonstrated neither." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "The evidence overwhelmingly proves that Mr. Hayes engaged in a systematic, premeditated campaign of financial fraud, attempting to hide over $4 million in offshore accounts. Furthermore, Mr. Hayes flagrantly lied under oath in this very courtroom, an act of perjury that this court finds deeply offensive to the judicial process." Ronald stared at the floor, his breathing shallow. "Therefore," Naomi continued, her voice rising in power and authority, "I am ordering the immediate dissolution of this marriage. Regarding the distribution of assets, due to the egregious financial misconduct and the dissipation of marital funds by the respondent, I am awarding the petitioner, Eleanor Vance Hayes, 100% of the disputed offshore assets." A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. She was taking everything. "Furthermore," Naomi's voice cut through the noise, "I am ordering Mr. Hayes to pay the petitioner's legal fees in their entirety, an amount totaling $450,000. The respondent's personal bank accounts, including his retirement accounts, will be liquidated to satisfy this debt immediately." Ronald shot up from his chair. "Your Honor, you're leaving me with nothing. I'll be bankrupt. I'll be ruined." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," Naomi roared, her gavel slamming down with explosive force. The sheer dominance of her voice forced him back into his chair. She leaned over the bench, staring directly into the eyes of the man who had once told her she was completely worthless. The legal facade remained, but the subtext was crystal clear. It was a message delivered from the ashes of her past, directly into the ruins of his future. "This court is not concerned with your resulting financial status, Mr. Hayes," Naomi said, every word perfectly enunciated, dripping with absolute, terrifying justice. "You gambled with your integrity and you lost. You are now entirely responsible for the consequences of your own arrogance. You have nothing left because you valued nothing. You are, legally and financially speaking, a footnote." Ronald flinched as if he had been physically struck. The exact word he had used to destroy her had just been weaponized to end his life as he knew it. "Finally," Naomi concluded, closing the heavy file, "a transcript of Mr. Hayes's sworn testimony regarding the offshore accounts will be forwarded by my clerk to the State Bar Association for review of ethical violations and to the District Attorney's Office for a formal perjury investigation. We are adjourned." Bang! The gavel fell for the last time. Naomi stood up, her black robe billowing around her. She didn't look back as she walked out the door and returned to her chambers. She took off her robe, hung it neatly on the wooden stand, and looked at herself in the mirror. She was no longer the girl crying in the rain. She was the storm itself. Back in the courtroom, Ronald Hayes sat completely paralyzed at the respondents' table. His wealthy wife had walked out, victorious. His expensive lawyer had abandoned him. He had no money, no wife, no reputation, and he was facing disbarment and criminal charges. He was, completely and utterly, alone. He looked up at the empty judge's bench, the heavy silence of the room pressing down on him, finally understanding the true, devastating cost of the woman he had thrown away. Wow, talk about the ultimate karma. Ronald thought he could discard Naomi like a piece of trash, severely underestimating the sheer willpower of a broken heart. He walked into that courtroom expecting a lingering flame, but instead he met a blazing inferno of justice. Judge Naomi Pierce didn't just break his ego, she legally and methodically dismantled his entire life. If this story of brutal revenge, twists, and absolute legal karma got your heart racing, make sure you hit that like button right now. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only for you to prove them entirely wrong? Let us know your ultimate comeback stories in the comments down below.